Hello everyone and a very welcome back to the Plane Guy. I know it has certainly been a long time, but I am now back on YouTube with ever more exciting content than ever. In this video I'm going to be doing a cold and dark tutorial on the Airbus A340-400 for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. This new release product was put out about a week ago by iniBuilds, and I know that so many people are really wanting to fly it. So in this three-part series, we're going to be looking at a cold and dark takeoff, climb, approach, and landing tutorial. In this video, we're going to be looking about how to do a cold and dark and just a few initial setup things. We're also going to be doing a lot more content as well on the A340 because there is an awful lot of features to share other than just that. Of course, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the comment section below, as I'd happy to see and answer them. You can also follow me on Discord. Details are down below, and I also have a Twitch channel as well, which is now sort of my primary channel where I do stream regularly. So I'd love it if you could become a part of our great community and please join us for some great content on all of my platforms. And as ever, a subscribe and like on this video would be greatly appreciated. Also, just to let you know as well, for the most part, I've been flying on Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, so I'm a little bit new on 2024. So just please do bear with me a little bit. Also, big shout out as well to my ever loyal fans that still follow me after all this time, and I can certainly assure you now that I am going to be putting a lot more great aviation related content on the channel, as I do have loads. But as ever, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Hello everyone and a very welcome to the cockpit of the Airbus A340-400. As you can see, it looks very similar to a lot of other Airbus cockpits, and that's because it is. The way that Airbus does like to build these aircraft is so that they are very common to other types, so it makes it a lot easier to transition. Today we're going to be using the EIS-1 type screens. These are the older CRT screens rather than the newer ones. A little bit unrealistic because I do think in today, because these are very much out of use and there isn't that many spares, then a lot of airlines have actually transitioned to the newer EIS Type 2 screens. But still, I love using the CRT screens, so we're going to be using those today. So first protocol I highly recommend to do if this is your first time getting into the airplane, highly recommend that you go over to your settings, throttle calibration, autosave, and just make sure that's really gone ahead and set up to your preference. I'm not going to be showing you how to go about that in today's video, but I will be doing another video that does explain a few of those options. But either way, I've already gone off and done that. Something else to also take note of as well here on the EFB is if you go over to the cog in the top right hand corner, just in case the airplane isn't in a cold and dark state, you can go ahead and set that, but you can also do things such as ready for takeoff on APU and on GPU. Just a bit of a note, the on APU and GPU could be a little bit more of a realistic option because it's very rare that you would find something like this aircraft in this case. It's one of its primary bases where you don't actually have any of the systems on. So even though we all love doing cold and dark, in some cases it can be a little bit unrealistic. But still, I'm going to show you how to do a cold and dark today. So the first thing you really want to do when you first get into the cockpit is you want to do something called the safety checklist. It's not always printed on some checklists. In the checklist I'm using today, it's not on there. But still, in this case, it's important you do go through those safety items. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that your throttle is at idle. Obviously, as you probably know, the engines aren't already on. So I like to do this as more of a simulator type function. I wouldn't necessarily do it in real life, but with some airplane they do form part of your checks. So you can actually go ahead, just make sure your throttle is working, that there's no sort of stoppages within that they are pretty much full and free of movement, as we call. Next thing you also want to go ahead and do is you want to make sure that basically your engines are off. In this case, all the engine masters are off and the engine control mode, probably saying that wrong, I forget what this knob's fully called, engine mode selector, that's it, it's just coming in my head there, is actually set to normal. Another thing you also want to do as well is you want to make sure that your flaps and your speed brake correspond with the outside position. So in this case, they're both up, which is fine. And of course, if you can as well, confirm the position relative to the screens as well. But obviously, because the screens are off, you can't do that. Another thing you also want to do as well is confirm the position of your parking brake. Now, in this case, even though we are on the chocks and we can actually release it, the issue we have is that GSX isn't fully set up yet and configured towards this airplane. So if you were to turn it off, GSX does get a little bit mardy. So I like to just leave that on, just so it keeps them happy, really. And the final thing here is you want to make sure your wipers are off as well, which they are. That's good. So the next thing you now want to go ahead and do is you want to go ahead and power up the airplane. So the first thing that I do with this is I like to check to make sure we've got good volts on all the batteries. Now, realistically, you want anything above 25.5 volts, okay? Anything under that could really be a bit of a problem. However, what you would actually find is that once they actually go below 22.5, that's when a few systems are going to start turning off. Reason for that is that it's actually preserving a lot of that volts for the APU start, so that we can get the AC power to then go ahead and actually charge those batteries back up. But either way, for the most part, you want to look above 25.5, which I have today. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn my batteries on here, like so. And because it's an older airplane, it has a lot more functions that are DC powered. So as you can see here, the engine instruments here, that screen's powered by that. You'll have to excuse me, I forgot what that's called. Also, the captain's PFD is also DC powered, and all these other screens are AC powered. But we'll get the AC on in just a second. So, two different sources of AC. You can use the APU. So if you are going to go ahead and do the APU, make sure you go ahead and do a fire check. Then you can start up your APU. Just make sure you repeat the APU fire check, because not all functions of that fire check will be available until you actually have AC power. But in this case, that's completely fine, just so long as you complete the check. However, another one you also have, which most of us would be using, is the ground power unit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, in which case the airplane will start to now do its power up. And yeah, again, just in case you don't actually have the GPU available for whatever reason, you can come over here to ground equipment and you can select it here via that. So as you can probably hear now, all the systems and whatnot are starting to come online. And as they're doing that, we're going to now go ahead and carry out some checks. Now, the first check I do like to do is I like to make sure we do have enough engine oil. However, we'll do that a little bit later. But continuing on now with the overhead scans, first thing that's always helpful to do as well is to get your IRSs aligned, because this can take up to 10 minutes in some cases. Sometimes a bit longer than that, but most part it does take a while, and it's helpful to try and get that done as one of your first items. So in this case, what we're going to do is going to come here to IR1. I'm going to put the switch to nav. You want to make sure that you do have that fault light come on temporarily, and that you have the on-bat light here. We're going to wait till that extinguish, and repeat on number 2 system. Same again, the fault light. Get the on-bat light, wait for that to go out, and we'll do the same on number 3. So continuing down now, we're going to carry out an APU fire check, and I am sort of skipping ahead a little bit. You'll have to apologise because this is because of me, because I don't actually have my views set up how I want them just yet. But I like to sort of come into this view here and carry out all the fire checks. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do an APU fire check, making sure the handle lights up, the agent and the squib. We also have the annoying alarm there. It's actually really helpful. We have the master caution and we have the ECAM actions, which is great. And very much the same when we do a fire check on all engines. You also just want to make sure here that the fire light also comes down on here like so. So this is why I zoom out a bit. Not necessarily following the correct flow, but I just find it's a little bit easier. So yeah, we get all those on. That is great. So continuing down, basically the Airbus philosophy is that you don't want any white, or in this case orange lights on. So you're just making sure that everything is turned on and is guarded like so. So yeah, that looks all fine. I'd normally also carry out a check on the emergency evacuation. The thing to just remember with that though, on this airplane, it's not actually functional, so I'm just going to leave that on, like the A340 I think. Yeah, again, GPWS, that's all on. Flight deck recorder, all that's on. Make sure you go ahead and turn on your crew supply oxygen. That's very important. I'm also just going to bing the forward cabin and actually, the forward galley, open the door as well, because I could do with a bit of a coffee, to be fair. So that's obviously a very important item, so that's something I will do. Next thing we're also going to do here is the lights. So in this case, you want to make sure nav lights are on. Wing lights, you can go ahead and turn on if you want. If it's a nighttime flight, I'd like to go ahead and turn those on. You shouldn't necessarily turn them on yet, but I find that it helps with workload, so I'll go ahead and turn those on. Obviously, beacon lights you don't want on. Strobe lights, you can leave them on auto, but I like to leave them off personally. And of course, runway land and your nose light. You don't need to have any of these on at this stage. Unless you want to do a walk around and you want to go out and check them, then you can do that. I'll also show you in another video as well how to do the walk around, but Bob here will be going out and doing that for us today very shortly. So another thing else I'm going to do as well is I'm going to turn my seatbelt signs on and my no smoking signs. It's also important to consider as well about how you're going to fuel the airplane up. So if you want to turn around, you're going to get the Bowser or a pump to come fuel you up, then you want to make sure that's turned off. Okay, whilst you are refueling. For me, considering it's the first flight of the day, I just like to load the fuel up straight away. So I'm going to turn those straight on. I'm also going to do a light test here as well, just making sure there's no any blown bulbs or anything. In case there is, we do have spares, because obviously we do want to make sure that if there is a problem, that the switch will say there's a fault, like as you can see here on the packs. But overall, that's all good today. Also, you've got lights here as well for your dome controls and a few other lighting options as well. But you can turn that on as need be, that's entirely up to you. Next thing I'm going to do here as well is we have our anti-icing controls. These are pretty much all on at the minute apart from the wing. So I'm just going to make sure that is off, which is fine. But overall, I'm happy with that. Like I say, no white lights there. And also the cabin pressurization. The landing elevation is set to auto, ditching is guarded, and it's pretty much in its automatic mode, which is fine. Moving on to the air controls, as you can probably see here, packs 1 and 2, we do have a fault. That's absolutely normal because there's no air running through the system, so they will say fault, which is completely fine, so don't worry about that. But other than that, you want to make sure that your ram air is guarded and that your engine bleeds and your hot air are, in this case, on and not off. So basically, you don't want it like this, you want them all on. You can also set your temperatures as well, however you decide, that's entirely up to you. But the same also works when it comes to the engine generators as well, the IDGs. There's currently no engines running, so there's nothing to power the gens, so that's why you also see those fault lights as well. So that's completely normal at this stage. But yeah, again, for the most part, you don't want to see any white, in this case, orange lights. Coming over now to the fuel panel, as you can see, we do actually have some orange lights here, and this is for the fuel pumps. That's completely fine at this stage because we don't actually need them, but prior to start, you do want to go ahead and make sure that those are turned on. The fuel system will work kind of without having those on. It will do something called suction feed, but it can actually damage the lines, so you do actually want to make sure you do have your fuel pumps on. Also here you've got your fuel transfer, what's known as the X feed on Airbus. You also want to make sure that's on as well. And here's your hydraulics as well. You also want to make sure that is on. You've also here got your fire test panel, which we've already gone through, like so. Something else I'm also going to check here as well, and something I do want to discuss, is that sometimes, I don't know why it's not doing it in this case, but for the most part, on your engine displays here, they should actually be coming up with a lot of X's, okay? Because that shouldn't be providing data at this moment in time. So one of the ways you can actually override that is if you come over to your overhead panel here, engage engine THEDEC ground power, and what that will enable it. And that's really important because you actually want to figure out how much engine oil you've got. You want to make sure you've got enough engine oil. In this case, this is measuring the amount of oil we have in each reservoir. And once we do start the engines, that will go down because some of that oil will be going and circulating through the engines, which is fine. But overall, you just want to make sure that, it's not showing any abnormal indications. And it all looks fine, which in this case we do. But just in case that doesn't show up, then you can go ahead and press that. So moving down now as well, you've also got engine manual start. Yeah, again, I'll probably do another video that explains how to do a manual start. But for the most part, you want to make sure that's all closed. Same with your ventilation. You can also do a test as well on your cargo smoke. I like to do so, so I'll be doing here like so. Does take a while to come online. So yeah, again, ECAM actions, master warning. And as you can see there, it's saying about the bottle discharge. And you also want to give it a bit of time as well because it will also go onto your aft component as well. So that's all fine. Something else as well, here's all the temperatures as well for the lower hold. You can set that up as needs be, and you also have a backup communications panel here, which I don't normally like to set up. But other than that, that's basically how you do the overhead setup. Okay, so now moving on to the next part, we're now going to go ahead and set up our MCP here. So I've already gone ahead and cheated and set up my QNH. I have a bit of a function set where if I press B, it'll do it automatically, but it's just one of those nice time-saving features I like to use. Moving across now, I'm actually going to set my navigation display here to plan, and that gives us a nice top-down view here of our flight plan, so it really is helpful for the planning. And also here we have our MCP. Now, normally until the flight plan goes in, I don't like to set this up, so I'll show you a bit later on how to do that. But something I do like to do and something I do want to show you is I'm actually going to set 5.9er in here on our altitude window, and this is something that Airbus pilots do in real life. If you're a Boeing pilot, it tends to go in as 100 feet, whereas if Airbus, it's more 900 feet, and that actually acts as a nice reminder that you don't yet actually have your IFR clearance. Now for us, because we're not on the network, it's not applicable, but it is just something I'd like to show you. Okay, so moving on now, yet again, when it comes to setting up your navigation displays, it's entirely up to you how you want to do that. For me, I like to have VOR set, but if you need an ADF, you can go ahead and set that. I highly recommend you have constraint on as well, because that will basically tell you if you have any altitude or speed restrictions. So that's really, really helpful. Now, moving on now here as well. Basically, you're looking for any abnormalities here. If you want, you can turn on your terrain on your navigation display. If you do need to set it to a northern reference, you can. But yet again, I'll talk to you more in a video about that. This is quite an abnormal feature unless you're operating really in high Arctic conditions. You don't really use this for the most part. But other than that, you do want to make sure your ECAM switching is set to auto. As you can see here, same also where you're switching down here, you want to make sure it's normal and auto, like so. So overall, this all looks good. We also have 4 gear down landing indications, that is good. You also want to make sure your anti-skid is on as well. You don't need to screw around with your auto brakes here, you can just leave those in neutral. But something very important you should do is you need to uncage your standby artificial arising, which we're doing here like so, and we'll just let it settle. Okay, that's great. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to set my lower pedestal up. Now, before I go ahead and do that, I like to just do a test on all the different airplane systems, make sure we don't have any issues with those. So as you already seen there, I've already gone ahead and brought my engine page there. Check the engine oil quantity, which is fine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my bleeds, make sure there's nothing abnormal with those, which there isn't. Pressurization, I like to make sure that the cabin altitude is set for our landing altitude at our current airport. So Frankfurt is roughly about 350 feet. So as you see there, 360, that's absolutely fine. Making sure there's no abnormalities there. Also check my electrical AC systems. As you can see there, we're on external power A, and that's providing all the necessary power to the bus. So that's great. Something else I also like to do here as well when I go over to the DC system, like I say, this airplane slightly older, is a little bit more reliable on DC systems. As we can see there, DC1, DC Essential and DC2 are going through the transformer rectifiers, which is what we need. But something else I'm also going to do as well, I'm just going to carry out a test, make sure the batteries are discharging as needs be, which is great. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those back on. And there we go, like so. It's now currently back up and running, which is great. So hydraulics, just looking at hydraulics there, they're all offline, which is good, how they should be. APU, we're going to turn that on in just a minute, but this is how this first page here should kind of look. Should just have all these orange X's, because it's currently not online. Conditioning, yet again, just making sure there's nothing wrong with that. Doors, I do like to monitor the door page a little bit more, so I'll probably put that on after this. As you can see here, we also have the wheel situation as well, so overall we've got good pressure in all the wheels and a good temperature as well. That's very important because for takeoff you need the temperature under 300 degrees. Also, if you've just maybe done a landing, you've come on to stand, you're doing a turnaround, it's helpful to get on the chocks as soon as you can as well, because you don't want to leave your brakes on, because it can cause them to struggle to cool down a bit. So yeah, if you've got brake fans as well, because you can enable that through the EFB, that can also help as well. But we don't have it on this one, so in case the brakes are hot, I'd want to get on the chocks and get the parking brake off as soon as I can, really. So fuel, yep, in regards to our fuel today, I've already gone ahead and asked for that to be loaded. 14.5 tons, we have 14.5, and as you can see here as well, demonstrates where all the fuel is, which is good. Something to also note as well is the fuel temperature, because if the fuel does go a bit cold, it can become it can solidify and actually could clog up the lines. So something important to just be considerate of, and we do have specific procedures for that. But I'm not going to go too much into today's video about that. Last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to check the status of the airplane. It is normal to see some inoperative systems. You would actually see another one as well, but we're considering now our IRSs are aligned. One of them has actually gone off, and you'll have to excuse me, I forgot what that actually is. But in this case, this is completely normal, PAT 1 and 2, Autopilot 1 and 2, and CAT 2, simply because those systems are currently well, the packs obviously, like I said earlier, don't have any air in. We're currently not using the autopilot. It's not set up, and category 2 is absolutely fine as well. So that's all fine. So you've also got this button here called recall. So basically, just in case you need to refresh the system, that's kind of like a refresh button. You can use that. And of course, if there's anything coming up, this is a clear button as well, in case you wanted to use that. Okay, so we're now going to hit the door situation and monitor that. So moving down now, I'm going to talk to you about the lower pedestal. So here you've got your comms panel like so. Something I do like to do and highly recommend you do, this is a real life procedure, is use your ground and tower frequencies maybe on VHF2, because it's very important that you do test your VHF2 on the ground or even VHF3. So that way you do know that you do have more than one working comm stack. But yeah, again, just consider how you would do that. For me, I'd normally put ground on VHF2 and then maybe try ATIS on VHF1 and switch between tower and ground frequencies as needs be, or clearance deliveries. Like I say, it's a strategy you just have to think about, and something that is done in real life. Highly recommend you do that. Obviously, we are off that sim today, so typically what you would actually do, even though it's not applicable on a sim, is you could actually set VHF2 up to monitor guard on 121.5, and then you can actually come down here to your volume controls and turn that up. Of course, you don't actually have to transmit on it, but it is important that you do listen to it. So in fact, that's actually what I'm going to do today. I'm going to put 121.5, even though it's not functional. That's something that you would probably would actually do in flight. Okay, in this case VHF1. So considering there's no ATC about, I've put 1 to 2 decimal 8 in. Of course, you can change that over. But yeah, down here is basically your volume control and comm selectors. Highly recommend you have your interphone, your cabin, and your PA selected. So in order to select it, you just tap on. Obviously, you get this yellow light to indicate you're on, and this here is your volume control. In case you want to speak on a certain channel, you just hit here for the call. Couldn't be simpler. Also, something else as well, I highly recommend, make sure you do have your integrity lights here set. As you can see here, they're currently now going off. So at least have them set to 50% is my recommendation. Your floodlights, you can set them up, like I say, to your own preference. And like I say, if you also want to turn up your integrity lights, you can do so as well. Entirely up to you. In terms of here, the weather radar and PWS controls. So in this case, you do want to make sure that's off. In this case here, where it says system, you also want to make sure that's off as well. You also want to make sure your ground control spoilers are on as well. Also, in regards to this as well, I like to have it set to weather radar plus T. But like I say here, you've got all these different modes. You can set that up however you want with your gain and tilt. But that's how I like to have it set up. Moving down now, parking brakes. Like I say, I've already discussed that. You've got your cockpit door here as well. You've also got your rudder trim, which I'll discuss a little bit later on as well. The only real other thing to discuss here is the FO's panel, but if you're flying captain like I am, you don't really need to set that up. The only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn my transponder on to auto. It's very important you do that because I will forget. Also, if you are flying FO, make sure you do cycle between these systems as needs be. So if in this case it was the FO flying, you would go over to system 2, and then on the next flight when the captain's flying, because you do rotate, you'd put it over to system number 1. However, also in this case as well, I'm just going to hit this clear function here, which totally gets rid of the 2000. So in case you do get a new squawk from ATC, you can go ahead and put it in there like so. But for us, there's no ATC, so I'm just going to leave 2000 in the box. So that's the lower pedestal complete. Okay, so considering that the initial setup has now been completed, something that I would normally do at this stage is I'd go here to payloads and fueling, and I would go ahead and put in all my weights and that as needs be. Just in case you haven't done a flight plan or anything like that, you can go over here to flight planner and put all that in. But for me, considering I do have one from SimBrief, I just come over here, hit import from SimBrief. I'll normally hit load with GSX, but today I put it in as an instant load because I want the airplane completely refueled. However, you can still use GSX, that's completely fine. It just won't be necessarily unrealistic. But basically from that you can get all your weights as needs be. So in this case it's 263 passengers, 14.5 tons of fuel. In terms of our actual takeoff weight 1751. We planned 1746, so that's fine. And same with the zero fuel weight, we planned 160.6 and it's 160.5. On our max CG and ZFW is 27.2 to 27.5. So overall that's very, very good. Highly recommend though that you do write this down because we are going to need it to set up the FMGS a little bit later on. Okay, everyone, so the next step now is to go ahead and set up our FMGS. I've asked GSX to start boarding the airplane, so they'll be getting on with that shortly. So the first thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to get rid of all these messages here because it's not relevant. So the first thing I want to go off and do is I want to head on over to data. Just something to know about this system as well. It may take a little bit of time for the actual page to come up. So as you can see here, it's actually responding very quickly, but sometimes it can just take a little bit longer, so it's important just be a little bit patient. So the first thing I want to do, going over to data index, is I want to check position. So as you can see here, this is the position of the FMS1, FMS2, and the GPS unit, just making sure that they all correspond, and even if they don't, that there isn't any major discrepancies there, like so, which is all good. I go over to IRS monitor. So, as you probably saw earlier, you had a message up here. Yes, we do. Yes, please. We did actually have a message coming up here saying about IR alignment time. One of the things you can also do as well is you can come over here, and whilst that's in alignment, it'll actually tell you how long it will take to align, and also it should say align as well. So basically, this is just used to triple check the status of the IRS, but then, like I say, you do actually have a message here that also comes up on the ECAM as well. But either way, still, there should be a nav at this moment in time, which they are, so that's correct. Also go over to GPS monitor, and I just check for any inconsistencies, make sure everything is correct how it needs to be, which is great. I'm happy with that. Then go over to aircraft status, and this is basically just checking to make sure that the FMGS is actually set up relative for the aircraft type that we are flying. Also the engines as well, because that will affect performance. Because the great thing about these things is that they can be interchangeable, sometimes between other airplanes. It's not the easiest thing to do, but yet again, you just want to make sure that it is correct. So, Airbus A340-300, that is correct. The engines that we're using, CFM56 Type 5C4s, that's also correct. Also, very important as well, you want to make sure your nav database is accurate, okay? And that is a very, very big thing in real life, okay? You have to make sure you have an in-date, up-to-date database. So, in this case, in regards to the date shown, that's absolutely fine. We're pretty much bang in the middle of that, so that isn't an issue. Of course, if it wasn't showing that, I highly recommend you go over to, in my case, Navigraph Hub and update that, or whatever system that you use to update your nav database. But yeah, highly recommend that. We also have a change code here as well, because there's loads of things you can actually change with this. I do know quite a bit about this, but I'm not going to go talk about that in this video today. Plus, I don't even think it's all that functional, but we'll just skip over that. So the next thing we're going to go over to do is going to go to the init page. This is your initial page where we're going to put in all the relative details for today's flight. So in this case, you want to put in your departure airport, in this case Frankfurt, and where you're going to, in this case Hamburg. So you want to go ahead and put it in there like so. Also something to point out as well, if you see these sections here where you have these yellow boxes, that means that the airplane needs that data, okay? You have to put that data in. So just be wary of that. Then when we do put it in the company route, that should go out, which is fine. I was going to say, if you do actually have a route, because you can actually get the files, put it in the relevant folder, and then you can actually do all this automatically. You can go ahead and type in the information for the company route there, like so. In this case, we're not doing that, so yeah, that's why I've gone from and to. The next thing here as well, alternates. In case you do have an alternate, you can go ahead and put that in like so. You don't have to put it in, but I like to do so, so I'm going to do that. In this case, Echo Delta Delta Victor. Then you also have to put in your flight number. Make sure this is the ICAO one. So this is the 3-letter 1. And I currently don't actually know what mine is. So I'm just going to go ahead and try and find that. I think I have got this wrong because I didn't research it properly, but in this case I'm just going to put Lufthansa Flight 20. I think in real life it's something like Lufthansa 3 Victor, something like that, but for the purposes of this tutorial today I'm just going to put in Lufthansa 20. But basically you'd put your air traffic control call sign in there like so. So, you're also going to go ahead and put your cost index in, that's very important, which we've done there like so. And the next thing you want to do here as well is you want to tell the airplane what altitude you're going to be flying at. But you also want to go ahead and find out what the temperature is relative for the altitude you're at. In this case, it's flight level 330, and the temperature is going to be minus 50. Like so. Don't worry about the trim, that's completely normal. It's just currently, it does that, that's fine. So, we've also got something here called the tropo. This refers to the tropper pause. Unfortunately, I don't have this data today, but if you do have that, I'd highly recommend you go ahead and put that in. So, we're going to go over to the wind section here. We're going to go over to wind request. Request the wind, because that's going to be very, very helpful. Also remember as well, all the wind readings are always in true. Okay? So we're going to go back to initialize here as well, and we're now going to actually put in some weight and balance information. So if you right click here like so, it's going to ask you what your block fuel is, your zero fuel weight, and your zero fuel weight CG. And this is where it's actually helpful to write it down, so you're not constantly going back and forth between the EFB. So in this case, our block fuel today is 14.5 tons. I like to carry out a check on that. Also, something important to note as well. Let's just say we had 14.9 tons. Does that mean that I could then round that up to 15 tons? Absolutely not. It's always vital that you round down, because it's better for the computer to say you're actually out of fuel and you have a little bit left, because it gives you that little bit more of contingency. So for whatever reason, if you need to do that, make sure to round down if needs be. So in this case, we've probably got 20 kilograms of fuel not accounted for, okay? 20 kilograms is absolutely nothing in this airplane's case, okay? But still, I won't go ahead and put something like 14.6, okay? So for whatever reason, if that said 14,590 kilograms, you know, it's better to put it in as 14.5 than it is at 14.6. Better to tell you, it's better for the computer to say you're out of fuel and you've always got a little bit left. Helps with quite a few things actually. So zero fuel weight. So zero fuel weight today is 160.5, and it's also asking for our relative CG to that, which is 27.5. However, I'm just going to triple check, make sure that I didn't get anything wrong. This is just for my own sake of mind. So max zero fuel weight 27.3. What did I put in there? I put 27.5, so it's a good thing I checked. What's my zero fuel weight? 165. Okay, so that's great. So yeah, again, always very, very helpful to check, because you want to make sure that those numbers are accurate. So basically now it's giving information about the trip fuel. So it's saying there about 3.6. It's actually 5.3. But just in case you need to, you can go ahead and change a few of these figures as needs be as well. But basically it's important that you do put the right details in, so that way it knows basically the operating limits, and it can also give you some very helpful information on things like I say here about fuel burn and what have you. So the next thing we're going to do now, as you can see here, is we're going over to our flight plan page, and we're actually going to go ahead and put in our flight plan. So the way that this should come out is you should have your destination here at the bottom, in this case Hamburg, and we go over to the top, it should have your departure. So we're going to go ahead and whack all that in. It's also helpful at this stage as well, if you haven't done so, to go ahead and get the ATIS. We do actually have an ACARS function on this airplane. I will show you in another video how to do that. But basically, you go over to ACARS, you can actually go get your ATIS, and you can actually go ahead and get it printed out. So in just a few moments, you'll hear the printer go off, but I've not actually properly set this up just yet. But either way, in terms of what's going off here, oh, that was a bit quicker than I thought. So as you can see here, it does actually say we don't actually have anything. So I'm just going to get rid of that, left click it. It'll come over here, and if you left click again, it puts it in the bin. Right, so in terms of the weather here at Frankfurt, we are 350 at 5, 310, variable 30, all the 9s overcast at 30, temperature 14, and the QNH 1028. It's actually giving me a departure today from runway 07, so that's what I'm actually going to be looking for. So if you go over to your departure airport, in this case Frankfurt here, should give you an option for fix information. So just to quickly talk about the fix option, if you put in anything, it could be an airport, it could be a VOI, it could be an ADF, it could be anything, you can actually draw a radial from that and put a ring around it as well. So in this case, if I do Frankfurt, as you can see there, it's actually drawn a blue ring. Now that's very good for situational awareness. Love doing that, especially on the approach. So if you ever want to do that, it's entirely up to you how you want to do it, then you can go ahead and do it via that. So if we go over to Frankfurt here, departure, we are going to be departing 07 Centre today. And our departure route, you can go ahead and put that in. However, if you don't necessarily have one, you can put none. Like I say, depends entirely how you're going to be operating the flight. But for us today, we do have a SID, which in nine times the situation will be the case. and today it's going to be a Marin 6 Echo departure. So you can go ahead, put that in like so, and then once ready, hit insert, and it will be inserted into the flight plan. And as you can see here with this plan view as well, you get a nice top-down view of that. So, in terms of entering the rest of your flight plan, what you want to do is you want to go over to your endpoint, here like so, you want to click on it, and then if you're going direct to a waypoint, you can put it in here. And I know that this waypoint is absolutely nowhere near, and it's a bit unrealistic, but say if you wanted to go direct London VOR, you can put that in there like so, and as you can see, 354 miles away, just select the appropriate one, like so. But also it works the exact same for waypoints as well. However, in our case, we're going to be on an airway. So simply what you want to do is you want to click airways like so, and this is where you would enter all the information. In this case, we're on Yankee 150 airway, and we're going off to Tolgi. Great, that is great. And then after that, we're actually going to be going direct to Sierra Alpha Sierra. But if you have any more airways after that, you can go ahead and put it in this next box here. Very simple. But like I say, today, after Tolgi, we're going direct to Sierra Alpha Sierra. We'll whack that in, like so. And then after that, we're going to be back on an airway. And we're going to go Papa 605 off to Nolgo. And then for us, it's going to be a Nolgo arrival into Frankfurt. Now, typically on a shorter flight, I'd also load up the star, which we are going to do. I'd also check the star as well, make sure there's any inconsistencies with that. But we're going to leave that a little bit later on because we do have a bit of time in flight to be able to do that. Also, something I also like to do as well is I also like to do a check as well, make sure the SID has gone in correctly, because sometimes the SID can sometimes miss certain points off. So I highly recommend to do that. However, I've already gone ahead and done that because I did do a bit of a practice flight earlier with this, and so it'll be absolutely fine. So in this case for Frankfurt, for some odd reason it's giving me runway 33. I didn't think there was a runway. Oh no, there is a runway 33. Okay, so we'll put the RNL in for runway 33, and it'll be the Nolgo 3 Sierra. Super. What we may actually have to do at Frankfurt, if the weather allows, because I'm really keen to show you how to do an ILS, we might actually switch to runway 23 and actually go in with a river crosswind here, just so, like I say, I can show you to do an ILS, because that's the approach that most people end up doing anyway. But it does look like traffic there at the moment is using runway 23 as well, so I do think that is an option. But yeah, again, this is where it's helpful to go ahead and just check the weather, which I'm just now currently doing in my case. And the wind's 290 at 10 knots, so yeah, there shouldn't be a problem with that. So in which case, I'm going to change it over now, actually. So yeah, again, if you ever want to change it, very, very simple. All you've got to do is just hit back on your destination here like so. Then you hit arrival. In this case, you go ILS runway 23, and then select the relevant arrival. In this case, we'll take a free Papa arrival, like so. Something else you should do as well is check, make sure if you've got any discontinuities, okay? So basically, what now happens is, now that the flight plan's in, both the captain and the FO would then compare the distances in both their flight plans with each other, also on the flight plan. I'm not going to do that today, but that's normally what would happen. Also, something you do as well is you can just do an entire run through here as well, just to make sure that that also looks good as well. And I also like to check as well that all the routes, all the waypoints in for our departure is correct as well. But like I say, I've already gone ahead and checked those and that everything is okay. Just in case there isn't, very, very simple. You can just go ahead, like I say, go here, type in next waypoint. If you ever need to delete anything, you can hit clear, hit the relevant one. Also, if you ever need to change any of your altitude constraints or speed constraints, very simple. You right click here, and then you can enter all the information in as needed. So if in case you need to change your speed, you can do that. Just in case you need to be a little bit faster or slower, you can also change that by putting in a plus or a minus. So let's just say, for instance, you need to be minus 220 knots. You can go ahead, you can put that in there like so. Oh, it didn't like it in this case, so I'm going to put 210 back in. But yeah, let's just say, for instance, altitude constraint, you need to be above a certain level. So in this case, 5,000 feet, you can go ahead and put that in. Or if you need to be in between a certain point, so let's just say, I don't know, 10,000 and 5,000 feet, you can sort of do it like that. Even though I didn't do it right, I would normally put in FL and do it like that. But still, That's just sort of explaining a little bit how to work the system, just in case you do need to make any changes as need to be. But as you can see here, departing pretty much northerly, as you do for a handbird sets, and then you do have this here where you start to turn north-northeast, and then roughly going back on a northerly heading, pretty much flying north, before then entering a downwind right hand to the east for runway 23. So that looks all correct, I'm happy with that. Okay, so the next thing you want to do now is head on over to Perth. Of course, I also at this stage like to put in all the fix information as well. But it's entirely up to you if you want to do that and as and when you want to do that as well. But obviously you want to do it before the airplane pushback if you are going to do it. So basically now it's asking for all the V-speeds. It's very straightforward what you want to do. You want to go over here to your EFB. You want to go over to takeoff performance. And you just want to make sure that everything here is right. So first thing I want to do is synchronize the weather. You also want to make sure departure runway is correct. Heading is correct. Also, if it's a wet runway, you want to make sure you put all those correct parameters in. So far, they look good. If you also hit synchronize FMGS, it'll also put in our takeoff weight for us. And basically, this explains the options relative for a takeoff. So basically, flaps, if you want to use flaps 1, flaps 2, flaps 3, etc. You've also got an overriding feature here for toga. Just in case you don't know about this, we have basically two takeoff power settings. We have the flex takeoff option, which is basically a D-rated option. So every time you take off, you don't always want to use full power. So if you've got a bit of spare runway, you can bring the power back a bit. We call that D-rating. And save a bit of the engine life. Also helps with noise. Helps in loads and loads of things. And basically that works off an assumed temperature. So yep, you can go ahead and use that. Or if you need full power, say for instance it's short runway, you can use that, and that's what's called toga. So basically, for whatever reason, if you want to force toga, like if it's a short runway, like for instance, I don't know if this is still a procedure, but I know Aer Lingus had it as a procedure on their Airbus A330s, where if the takeoff weight was above 200 tons, it always had to be toga. Okay, I'm not too familiar with any procedure that Lufthansa might use, but yeah, again, the option is there. So if you want to use a toga takeoff, you can put it in like so. In this case, I'm more than happy for the airplane to be on optimum flaps, and also optimum when it comes to anything like flex or anything like that. So I'll hit calculate there, and as you can see, it has given us our options there for a flex takeoff, which is great. I think if we're slightly heavier, that would then come up as toga, for instance. So basically, the computer would say it recommends a full power takeoff in a nutshell, really. But what we're looking for here first is our V speeds, okay? So V1, the safe reject speed. So basically, when we put that into the computer, what it should say is once we hit V1, so it should say V1, so then we're committed to takeoff. VR, that's our rotate speed, that's at which point we'll start to pull back on the control column and get the airplane airborne. And the V2, so just in case we should lose an engine in and around V1, that's basically the safe climb speed if we should lose one or more engines, basically. So we'll be looking to climb out 160 knots. We're also going to be doing a flat 1 takeoff as well. Okay, and that's also the trim setting there as well, which is 4.9 up. So I'm also writing that down as well. But for us here today, it's a flex takeoff of 53. Something else we can also do as well is we can send those details off to our FMGS here. So we can go ahead and put those in. So in this case, 150, and as you can see there, it comes up on our speed tape there on our PFD. We're also going to go 155. We're also going to go 160. Like so. Transout, basically, you can find that information out from your charts. That's the point that we're actually then going to switch from, in a nutshell, local pressure to standard. I'll explain that once we do get airborne. Like I say, normally you can get that from the charts. However, sometimes an ATIS might override that. It's also important to consider TRL, okay? So in this case, the TRL is 6,000 feet. The Transat is 1,000 feet below. So 5,000 feet, that is absolutely correct. We also have a thrust reduction and aircraft acceleration. I do believe that the lowest you can do on this airplane for our thrust reduction altitudes is, I'm just trying to remember. I mean, most people said it's about 1,500 feet. Also, when you factor in the height of the aerodrome, in this case, 1,860, that's absolutely fine. But I do believe the lowest it can take a flex takeoff, a thrust reduction altitude is approximately about 400 feet. So yeah, just in case you do need to change that for whatever reason, that's the lowest that you can do, 400 feet. In the Airbus A340's case, it is actually helpful to leave it at 1500 in my opinion, because it's not the most powerful airplane in the world. It's actually quite underpowered. So actually leaving the takeoff power on for a little bit longer could be a bit helpful. Okay, so next thing we're also going to do now is we're going to put in our flaps and our trim setting. So this is how I like to do it. So you go flaps 1 and this symbol here. You have to apologise, I don't know what that's called. But obviously if it were flaps 2 takeoff, then you would put in 2 as well. So we're also going to put in the symbol in here again. And we're going to say that we want 4.9 up. Okay, sometimes on Airbus you can get a bit of down trim, so in which case if it was down you'd go DN. I'll just demonstrate it here. I don't know, let's go DN1 for instance. So just in case you ever had to use that, you can do it, just put DN. So in this case we want 4.9, so we'll go 4.9. Also flex temp as well, very simple, you just put in your flex temp temperature. In this case it is 53. So for the most part this is your FMGS setup now, ready to go. But something else I also want to show you as well is you also have the option for a secondary flight plan option. Now this is very helpful in case for whatever reason you might have to come back. So we have something called departure alternates. Now let's just say we're taking off from slightly a smaller airfield. We're very, very heavy. The runway might not actually enable us to come back in. So you might actually have to have a departure alternate. And just in case that, I don't know, you should have something like an engine failure or anything critical where you have to come back in, it's helpful having this secondary plan in place because you can just simply go off and enable it rather than having to spend ages going around and making a new flight plan to come back into the airport. So yeah, again, it's always helpful to see your departure alternate. For us, Frankfurt coming back won't be any problem, so we can put that in as Frankfurt. But basically, like I say, then you just want to go ahead and put in all the same details. As I said before, I'm not too sure what the actual call sign is of today's flight. I think it's something like 3 Victor, something like that. But that's normally where you'd put the call sign in. But in this case, I don't have that, so I'm just going to put the flight number in. And you don't necessarily have to bother with your temperature. Like I say, oh, that's my bad. I just only really want to go as high as flight level 80, so I'm just going to put that in there like so. If you also go back to secondary flight plan there, you can actually go ahead and then you can actually put another route in. I just like to put in the arrival route though, get me vector straight in for a landing runway. In this case, I think we can take ILS 07 right. So I'm going to put that in there like so. I don't want any star. Then you can hit insert like so. So that way it actually gives me some points there to come back in. But another good thing you can also do with this as well is you can actually sort of like build up a circuit pattern, as you can see there like so. So just in case you do need to come back, then you do have those options there like so. The final thing that I will do, I should have done this a bit earlier, but you can do it a bit later on, that's entirely okay. So I'll go over to prog, and I'm looking to see what the airplane's saying about our cruising level. So in this case, it's given us optimum 385. Now let's just say that I was doing a flight to Heathrow, for instance. Then I would actually consider changing my final level. Bear in mind, this is an incredibly short flight, and I don't want to increase the workload an awful lot. So we're going to stick at 330, but it's important to consider what these also say. Also, you want to make sure that your GPS accuracy is high as well. Okay, that's something else you want to check as well. But other than that, that is pretty much the FMGS setup now complete. That also now means I can go ahead and set up our MCP, ready for departure. So, I'm going to go ahead and turn on our flight director. As you can see there, we do actually have some autopilot mode standby. In this case, we've got climb and nav. Yet again as well, it's up to you if you want to go ahead and ask for clearance at this stage. That's basically however you prefer to do it. In this case, we are going to pretend that we already do have the clearance. It's a little bit early. But basically, we've been given the clearance. There's no ATC. In this case, it's going to be an unrestricted climb up to flight level 330. So I'm going to put 330 in. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the MCP modes as well. So basically, we have manage modes. That basically means that whatever's in our FMGCS, the airplane will follow. Or we can have more sort of like manual modes where we can basically put the information in. So let's just say, for instance, we want the airplane to fly a certain speed. You can left click here. And you can basically dial in whatever speed you want. I'm going to click it at the top here like so, and that's going to go into the manage speed mode and go off whatever information is on our FMGS. Also the same when it comes to heading. So sometimes when you do depart, ATC might actually give you a heading, so in which case you can go ahead and set that like so. It's also important as well when you do take off, you either had a heading mode or you have it on nav mode. Okay, in this case we're going to have it on nav mode. So as you can see there, engage nav mode, and it's in blue, so it's standing by. So yeah, again, same with altitude, but that'll also affect how the airplane climbs. We've got what we call open climb, which means that relative to the airspeed we're at, it'll maintain its best climb rate. So as you see there, we've got open climb, and if we click on there, like so, we're going to climb, so it'll climb via what the information we have here on the FMGS. But just in case we did want to override anything, like I say with vertical speed, you know, we can enable that here, like so. That's entirely up to you. But one big thing though is just make sure that you do have your flight directors on there, like so. But other than that, we're pretty much now ready to go. One last final thing I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead, turn on my APU, so we're now ready to go. So in order to turn on the APU, couldn't be any simpler. I'm going to go down here, hit the APU page. It's helpful to monitor the startup. I'm going to go to the master switch. What that should now do, you see here, that turns on the, I do believe the APU has a FADEC. So that's going to enable that. That's why we can now see some figures with the engine. It's also going to say flap open as well for the air intake. And then when you're ready, you can hit start. So basically, the APU, just in case you don't know, small jet engine in the back. Doesn't provide any propulsion, but we can use it for air. So air conditioning, we also need it for starting up the engines as well on the A340. And we can also use it for electrical power. So once this comes online, we can actually get rid of the external power. So that's very normal to see the EGT go that high. That's absolutely fine. You just don't want to make sure that it goes into the red here. And then basically now we're waiting for, in this case, the M1 to come up. And then also there does have a generator connected to it as well. So once the APU is all good, it will automatically go onto the generator and provide power as needs be. Now, for whatever reason, just in case you do need to turn that off, you can go ahead. It does have a battery. I won't recommend turning that off, but by playing around with the bus ties and what have you, you can actually disenable that. But that's never something that you should do. So as you see there, we have actually got the available light, and the APU generator has now come on. So if you have a look at our electrical AC, what's actually now happening is the APU generator is doing something called load shedding with the external power. So if you want, you can leave the external power in. However, in this case, I'm going to disconnect it. And as you can see, the load does now increase on the APU. Also, something we can now do as well is we can turn on the APU bleed, and that's going to provide us with some air conditioning. So if you go over to the air conditioning panel here, like so, like I say, we're now getting hot air into the system, and it's now going to start conditioning the cabin for us. So basically, that is now it for the initial setup. The only thing we need to do now is carry out a quick checklist item, and then that's us ready with the before start items, really. So for us, this is done in the Cockpit Preparation checklist. I should point out that some checklists can differ quite a lot because they can actually support certain airline operations. But yet again, if you are wanting to use a checklist, if you're not wanting to, that's entirely up to you. This is just a little bit of a demonstration. So to start off with, we've got the gear pins and covers. They are removed. Bob here checked that on the walk around, didn't you, Bob? Bob? Oh, he's got Monk on with me. He don't want to speak to me. Right, okay, so we'll assume we do have them on board. I've checked anyway, they're not obviously on, but yeah, again, I will be doing another video that explains about the walk around. So, fuel quantity, we have 14.5, we need 14.5, that's great. The idea is we want to check, make sure they're on nav, so the actual switches are on nav. We also checked earlier with the FMGS, they're also on nav as well. We also want to check the barometric reference. Now, I have set these up via the EFB to be synced, which today is 1028. So overall, that's the cockpit preparation checks complete, and we're now ready for startup.